My name is Stewart Rothman. They call me Stu. I was born in Rochester, New York, December 27th, 1930. Brought up in Detroit. That's where I joined the Army, out of Detroit, Michigan, back in 1948. I joined the Army in March of 1948 and first was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where I took my basic training. And after that, headed to Tokyo. I was on the I forget the designation. It was the Alexander. The Alexander and the Ainsworth, two ships, went over from Fort Lawton, Seattle to Tokyo and docked at the same time. And I was slated to be a light machine gunner in the first cav. They pulled about a dozen guys off each ship, and instead we went to GHQ, Tokyo, General MacArthur's headquarters, interviewed by personnel, and I wound up being a photographer in civilian life, even though I was a young kid. I was 17 when I joined the Army. I wound up in the GHQ photo lab, and at the age of 17, my first major assignment there in General MacArthur's headquarters, I was on the 25-man team that photographed the war crimes trials of Tojo, Shigemitsu, and all the Japanese war criminals. And I knew Colonel Quinn at that time. He was the intelligence officer in MacArthur's headquarters, and he did the intelligence for the Inchon invasion. And it was just an odd quirk of coincidence that when the war was going bad in November of 50, when the Chinese came across, he did the intelligence for the Inchon invasion. He was with MacArthur on the ship watching, and he was so enamored of the 17th that through General Fehrenbaugh, he got control of it, became the regimental commander. And about that time, they were looking for cannon fodder all over Tokyo, and me being a young kid, I stuck my hand up and off I went. And in the luck of the draw, I was fortunate enough to wind up in the 17th. And the long, harried, hectic process, I got there and became a BAR man at Fox Company, 17th Infantry. And we arrived in Hwachan. It was early February of 1951, and I'll never forget that day because we came by train from Busan, and the day I arrived, we hadn't gone far from the station when an ammo train blew up in the station, and we could see the shock waves in the air, and it really resounded. I was a corporal then, or was I a PFC? I don't really remember. I came home from Korea a year later, a buck sergeant, but that's another story. There are a lot of interesting things happened. Being a young kid, I was looking for decorations. I didn't want to go home with a Occupation of Japan ribbon and a good conduct medal, and ever ask my friends and say, what did you do over there in the war, and tell them I was just a photographer in Tokyo. So maybe I asked my platoon sergeant once too many times, do I qualify for the CIB? We'd be out on patrol, I'd hear some noise, some shooting, and he'd say, I'll let you know. And one day, just outside Hwachan, I think we were, I'm not sure, but I think we were heading over toward the Hwachan reservoir, and we're going across a valley one day on patrol, and the snow started spitting up all around us, and we were under some pretty heavy light fire from a nearby hilltop. And everybody hit the snow and dug in and just flurry around, and in that first pregnant pause, in that first quiet you get after the initial gunfire, the sergeant yells out, "Hey, Rothman!" And I thought, holy crap, he wants me to come up there with the BAR, expose myself, and I didn't know what to say. I just said, yes! And then his voice, and I remember it to this day, echoed. He says, you got your goddamn CIB now. Well, as I said, February, it was wintertime, but we were lucky. We were lucky, so lucky that General Quinn was there, well, Colonel Quinn, and we were doubly lucky because we owned the air, and we didn't have the North Korean or Chinese Air Force to contend with. And when you own the air, you can do anything. And Colonel Quinn, he brought a laundry up. He determined that the biggest casualties were coming back with trench foot in the summer, frostbite in the winter. So every day for lunch, we'd get sea rations with 2 fresh pair of socks. He brought a laundry up to each battalion, and we got clean socks with our sea rations. But when you talk about food, what he really did was so fantastic. When I came home from Korea, and I told my cousins who'd been in World War II about eating Salisbury steak and ribs and fried chicken on the front line in the foxhole, and having bacon and eggs and sausage and French toast for breakfast, they thought I was nuts. But what Quinn did was he caused each company to have a kitchen tent a few miles in back of the front line. And they'd cook a complete meal 4 or 5 hours in advance, load it into 5-gallon Mermite cans, and they had these South Koreans, too old, too young, too something to be in the ROK Army, and they'd load into a weapons carrier, a 3/4 ton, and drive up to the hill we're dug in on, and with a GI from the kitchen in front and a GI in back, they'd snake up the hill and set up a serving line about 40 yards or so in back of the front line. And if there wasn't an action going on, one man out of each foxhole came back, went through the line, and had a hot meal for breakfast and supper. And then they had a boiling water thing with an immersion heater, and you dip your mess kit in it and fill it up and take it to your buddy. And the next day it was his turn to come eat and bring food to you. So it really was fantastic. Well, that was February, our first experience. A couple of months later, I think it was maybe a month or 2 later, I don't remember exactly, but we were just north of the Hwachan reservoir, and we were playing leapfrog. And you know what that is, where one squad goes and secures a position, and the next squad moves through it and secures. And that particular day, we were the lucky ones. We made contact, and the enemy was rolling. They laid a field of machine gun fire down, so it pinned us down, and then they were rolling frag hand grenades down on us. And our fragmentation grenades don't smoke or hiss. There's smoke and hiss. And one rolled down past me, and Catlow was my assistant on the VAR. He carried the ammunition, the extra ammunition. And this one grenade stopped by him, and it literally tore him in half, got him in the middle. And I was looking at him, and he wasn't 15, 20 feet away, and I got showered with dirt and stuff, and I got some minor scrapes. And just then another grenade came down, and it stopped about 3 feet from me. And I looked at it, and I stared at it. It was smoking and hissing. I think that was the longest second of my life, and I just pushed the ground, to hell with the machine gun, and went away from it. When it went off, I was just sprayed, and like rocks hit me everywhere, and one piece of the grenade went by my finger, and there's a little gray line there now, but the tip of my finger was hanging back, and that hurt like hell. Well, by then, the rest of the platoon had come up. They laid down a field of fire, and they yelled who was wounded. There was a couple of us, and we crawled back down to where a medic could get to us. And the medic came up, and he says, "Where you hit?" And my finger was hurting so bad, and I said, "My finger?" And he just looked at me with disgust, like the whole platoon laid down a field of fire for me to crawl back, and I had a cut finger. And I'm thinking, my leg started throbbing where a rock had hit it. At least I thought it was a rock. And he said, "Is that it?" And I said, "Well, my leg." So he knelt down, and he cut away my waterproof pants, and he cut away my OD pants, and there were my long johns, red from the knee to the hip. And I was so relieved that I was really hit. And it sounds stupid, but it was a relief. And I was stretcher jeep off the mountain down to a MASH, and then by a Goonie Bird C-47 back to Taegu to the 4th Field Hospital. And I'll tell you a sidebar note, the 4th Field Hospital was really something, because the nurses' aides were all young Korean women, and they worked nights next door to the hospital at, shall we say, a friendly facility. And what you do is, if you were ambulatory at all, you get in your wheelchair and get over by the other side of the swimming pool where the fence was, and you knock on it, and they'd slide a couple slats aside, help you through the fence into another wheelchair, and they'd show you other ways to relax. And I was back to that hospital twice more on evac. Never changed. Well, I was in the hospital and at that facility for about 3 weeks. And then finally I went back to Fox. And the next time I was hit was in May. It was at Hwachan. And that's one of these once in a million things. Lieutenant Weeks, Weeks, Lieutenant Weeks, was a young, fresh lieutenant right out of either the Point or OCS, and he was our platoon leader. And we had this one hill we were trying to go, and there was a machine gun at the top, and we couldn't break it. And Lieutenant Weeks gave the order for marching fire. And I heard this sound like you drop a cantaloupe on a concrete floor. And I turned to my right, and there was Lieutenant Weeks, and there was this hole in his forehead, and his brains were bubbling out as he fell. He's about 3 feet from me. I looked back, and this one gook stood up in the nest, and he threw a hand grenade. Well, he was dead before he hit the ground. About 6 of us saw him at once, and everybody fired. But I looked up in the air, and I saw the hand grenade, and it was like you watch a baseball. It was coming right for me, and it was as if it was slow motion, and it just was coming, and I was staring into it, and at the last second, I just ducked my chin into my chest, and the grenade hit my helmet, and bounced off in back of me, and went off somewhere in back of me, and knocked me to my knees, and it was feathers everywhere, because it was like snowing, because my sleeping bag on my back was just torn to shreds. And Pansy came up. Panzola was my assistant on a BAR then. Pansy came up and said, he said, are you hit? And I said, no, man. I said, God damn it. I said, I'm the luckiest son of a bitch in the world. I said, did you see that? He threw a grenade. It bounced off my helmet. It went off in back of me. I didn't get a scratch. I said, you want to cut my pack off? And I'm still on my knees. And he goes around behind me, takes the knife out, and he starts to cut the straps. And he said, you weren't hit. And I said, no. I said, all I got is this lousy headache. He says, feel the back of your helmet. And I put my hand back there, and my finger went in this hole. And I said, oh, shit. He said, now feel the back of your neck. And I put my hand there. It was all wet. And I bring it around, and it's all blood. And I said, oh, shit. He says, don't move. And he lifted my helmet and my helmet liner up. They were attached. And then he took my fur pile cap off, and he plucked 1/2 of a square of the grenade off where it was sitting against my scalp and handed it to me. And I never even went to a hospital. I went to the aid station. I think it was the 49th Field aid station, about half a mile or a mile back. They sewed me up about a dozen stitches, and I went back to Fox. The only problem was that I got a pretty bad concussion, and I couldn't wear a steel helmet. So since I had a couple Purple Hearts, they transferred me back to Taegu to the 8th Army Honor Guard for my last months in Korea. But I couldn't wear the chrome-plated helmet either, so I rotated home, became a recruiting sergeant in South Bend, Indiana, and that's where I finished my Army time. I said I went back home. It wasn't quite that simple because, you see, remember I had lived in Tokyo for 2 years and 7 months before Korea. And naturally, I had a Japanese girlfriend in a house. And so I wanted to get back up to Tokyo. And they were sending us home out of Sasebo by boat. They'd send from Busan to Sasebo, and you'd go home by ship. Well, when I got to Sasebo, I called my moose in Tokyo and had her write me a letter in Japanese and tell me that my samurai sword was okay and my radio, and she was, none of this stuff existed. And she wrote a whole bunch of stuff. And I took it down to headquarters there at the company commander, and I got permission and orders to go to Tokyo to get my personal gear. Well, I got to Tokyo, and I spent a week or so there, and then I got on flying orders. So I was sent home with a C-97 double-decker Stratocruiser. We landed at Midway Island for refueling, and then we landed at Hickam in Hawaii. And when we got to Hickam, the captain in charge said, you all got your own 201 file with you. Our finance officer will give you any money you want. go to town and have a good time. And he says there'll be flights posted every day, and any man misses more than 3 flights is going home by boat. And so I had a fun time in Hawaii in 1951, and I didn't miss 3 flights, only missed 2. I came home by plane to Frisco, train up to Detroit, and while everybody was on your first 30-day leave, all the other guys were out having a ball, recuperating, having friends. What I did was, on my first day of leave, put on my Class A's with everything and went down to Michigan Military District headquarters and filled out all the forms for recruiting duty. And so when I went back to Battle Creek, and the orders were cutting every day, and here's all the guys I was with, DI, training instructor, and then my name pops up, recruiting sergeant, South Bend, Indiana. You talk about some PO'd guys, but that's how I finished my Army career. So March of 1952, I got out, went to Wayne University under the GI Bill of Rights, and here I am today.